On today's show, we have our guest, David Goa. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about some of the harder concepts in the Bible and in the faith. And some of these concepts are often ridiculed. Are they being misunderstood? And I think most of us, if you're watching this channel, have probably seen the famous Hitchens versus Hitchens debate, where that famous atheist, he'd often bring up the Bible verse, or those passages where people are called sheep, as being derogatory and an insult to the human condition. How do we understand those particular verses in the Bible? And how do we understand just what does it mean in some of the other titles? For example, one body but many parts. Some are called to be teachers, others prophets, and so on. How do we understand all these different labels and titles in the faith? Some are called to be priests, others are called to be deacons. Just what do these titles mean? David Gould?
Well, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament are born out of a world in which agriculture, in which agricultural metaphors are ubiquitous. Mm-hmm. So there are many agricultural metaphors because the vast majority of people for whom those texts are sacred lived in that world. You have to draw the metaphors from the world that people live in. And what do metaphors do? Well, metaphors are multivalent. They speak about a variety of things. So let's just think about sheep for a minute.
Hitchens would really grind on this, but go on.
Yes, I know. I suspect he would grind on it because he himself was an old communist. Mm-hmm. And if there's any example of the kind of reductionist notion of sheep that we have in the 20th century, it is what the Bolsheviks did in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And the only way they used sheep was to slaughter them.
Yeah.
So this is a cover story for Mr. Hitchens. But I don't want to spend any time on that.
Okay. I totally agree, but go on.
So when you're in the Near East, and you can still see this to this day, I spent a little time in Syria, and I saw shepherds with herds of sheep and goats. Mm-hmm. And the goats are hard to keep with the herd because goats are very independent and they wander off, and so the shepherds are constantly running after the goats and trying to get them to come along properly. So you see this in the landscape. So sheep a shepherd cares for the sheep. Mm-hmm. The sheep sustain the shepherd. The shepherd doesn't exist without the sheep, and the sheep doesn't exist without the shepherd. There is a profound symbiosis here, and a relationship which is where there is deep indebtedness to each other. In the ancient world, sheep provide you with your clothing. They provide you with your sustenance, milk, cheese. They provide you with your diet when they are killed and used as a source of food. So sheep have a pretty intimate relationship to virtually all aspects of life. sheep are also part of the sacrificial cult of the ancient world. We still see this to this day within Islam, of the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths. Only Islam still practices sacrifice for a particular feast, the great feast of sacrifice. And in Islam and in Muslim countries, we've just come through Ramadan. Muslims have just come through the great fast of Ramadan. You can see this in that religious world, and it's moving to see there. Now, even though the sacrifice of sheep, the sacrifice of animals, is no longer part of the Jewish tradition, and is no longer ended with the temple cult, with the destruction of the temple of Judaism, and it's no longer a part of Christianity, we must remember that that's only an appearance. Go to a Greek section of Chicago, or New York, or Athens, or Thessaloniki. Go there the week before Easter and walk by the meat shops and see how many sheep will be hanging there, ready to be prepared for the Paschal feast. So some of these things get secularized, but they're still there. What is a sacrifice? The word sacrifice means, it doesn't mean to give up. It means to make holy, to make sacred. So the sacrifice of sheep was a normative part of the ritualization of redemption in this part of the ancient world. And in that sense, the sheep is a metaphor for clothing, clothe the naked, feed the hungry. It was a metaphor for the whole of your communal life and your spiritual life. It spoke to physical need and it spoke to spiritual aspiration. What Mr. Hitchens didn't seem to grasp in this little game of his, he was always inclined to the cheap shot, was that Jesus Christ is called a sheep. So why is that? And what does that say about him as a good shepherd and about the faithful as being sheep? Well, it is saying that that relationship between shepherd and sheep, in all its multivalent character, all of that needs to be part of the metaphor. We are speaking here of the need for care. We all need care. We all need someone to care for us. We all need someone to protect us from the wolves in all of their guises in our life. And each of us is also called to care, to protect others from the wolves. Each of us is also called to lead to the safe places, the places where the night doesn't devour us. So it is simply too cheap from my perspective, and Mr. Hitchens ought to have known better, to reduce that metaphor to what the Bolsheviks did by the millions to anybody who didn't buy their ideology or got in the way of it. They sent them to the slaughter. Give me the New Testament anytime.